If you want to buy a house in the modern world, you don't wheel a vault of cash across town. You change numbers on a digital screen. Money at its highest level is entirely invisible. But on the remote Micronesian island of Yap, the economy relied on a currency that was not only physical, but practically immovable. They called them ryestones. These weren't small coins you could slip into your pocket. These were massive circular limestone discs, some measuring up to 12 feet in diameter and weighing over 4 metric tons. They were scattered across the island, leaning against homes, lining pathways, and resting in village squares. By all laws of traditional economics, a currency that takes 20 men just to tilt should have paralyzed trade. Yet, for centuries, the Yapese people maintained a thriving, highly fluid economy using these giant stones. And they did it by inventing a brilliant decentralized social algorithm that predated blockchain technology by half a millennium. They figured out how to move money without ever moving the cash. To understand how a giant immobile stone can function as hard currency, you have to look past the physical object and analyze its structural scarcity. In macroeconomics, a medium of exchange only holds value if it's incredibly difficult to counterfeit, exploit, or inflate. It requires a high barrier to entry, and the island of Yap had a natural barrier built directly into its geology. Yap is a volcanic island. It's composed of basalt, dark soil, and dense jungle, meaning it possesses absolutely zero natural deposits of limestone. To the ancient Yapese, limestone wasn't just a building material, it was a rare, shimmering crystal that could only be found hundreds of miles away. To source their currency, Yapese navigators had to engineer massive double-hulled voyaging canoes and sail them over 250 miles across the unpredictable, storm-ridden open ocean of the Pacific to the rock islands of Palau. Once they arrived in Palau, the geopolitical challenge began. The Yapese were foreigners. They had to negotiate with local Palauan chiefs, trading their labor, woven mats, and coconut beads just for the legal rights to quarry the limestone cliffs. Once permission was granted, the physical crucible started. Using nothing but primitive shell adzes, fire-weakening techniques, and stone tools, teams of Yapese men spent months in the grueling heat hacking these massive, mathematically precise circles straight out of solid rock faces. They painstakingly chiseled a smooth central hole through the middle of each disc so that the heavy wooden logs could be slid through to lift them. But the most terrifying part of the supply chain was the return transit. The miners had to roll these multi-ton stones down jagged cliffs, balance them precariously onto fragile wooden rafts, and tow them behind their voyaging canoes back across 250 miles of open ocean Pacific waters. If a sudden storm hit, the raft would flip, dragging the canoes and the crew down into the abyss. This was the ancient world's purest manifestation of proof of work. The value of a rystone was never based on the chemical composition of the limestone itself. The stone was merely a physical, unfalsifiable receipt of the sweat, the high-stakes logistics, the raw human labor, and the lives risked or lost to bring it home. The more brutal the voyage and the more blood spilled to secure the stone, the higher its cryptographic value on the island's ledger. Value wasn't given. It was mined through pure physical endurance. But here is the true engineering masterpiece of the Yapese system. Once a rystone successfully survived the ocean transit and arrived on the island, its physical movement came to a complete halt. It was virtually locked in place forever. If a villager wanted to buy a massive plot of agricultural land, purchase a newly built voyaging canoe, or pay a substantial wedding dowry, they faced a glaring mechanical problem. They didn't try to roll a 4-ton stone down a narrow dirt jungle path. Doing so would risk crushing homes, breaking the currency, or exhausting the village workforce. Instead, The Yippies bypassed the physical hardware altogether and invented a brilliant decentralized social algorithm. They realized that money doesn't need to move physically to change hands. Only the record of ownership needs to shift. To execute a high-value transaction, the entire village would gather for an open oral assembly. The buyer would publicly announce that ownership of a specific, highly recognizable rice stone resting outside a specific hut a mile away now belonged entirely to the seller. The seller would formally accept the transfer. The village elders and the community would witness the exchange and commit it to memory. This is precisely what modern computer science calls a distributed ledger, the exact foundational framework that powers modern blockchain networks and cryptocurrencies. There was no central bank building, no physical vault, and no paper receipt prone to rot or forgery. The master record of who owned what wealth existed entirely in the collective redundant memory of the community. If a corrupt villager tried to double spend an asset or falsely claim a stone belonged to them, the system's built-in defense mechanism would kick in. The rest of the village would instantly veto the transaction, referencing the public records stored in their shared memory. Long before the invention of microchips, the Yippies had engineered an unhackable, completely transparent, decentralized financial system where security was maintained by absolute social consensus. The absolute mind-bending genius of this psychological software was put to the ultimate test by a legendary historical anomaly. During a particularly catastrophic storm on the return voyage from the quarries of Palau, a crew of elite Yippies navigators found themselves losing control of their raft. The sheer mass of the 4-ton limestone disc they were towing was threatening to drag their entire voyaging canoe under the waves. To save their own lives, the captain made a brutal executive decision. They severed the ropes. The crew watched in silence as their pristine, immensely valuable stone slipped into the dark Pacific, sinking thousands of feet down to the trench floor where no human could ever reach it. The crew survived and eventually made landfall back on Yap. They sat down with the village elders and the community to deliver their report, detailing the exact mathematical dimensions, the beautiful quality of the limestone, and the tragic circumstances of the loss. Under any traditional physical monetary framework, the wealth was gone. The capital had vanished into the abyss, but the Yippies elders looked at the ledger and made a radical economic ruling. They decreed that since the labor had demonstrably been performed, and since the crew's testimony was verified, the stone still counted as money. Even though that specific rice stone was sitting in pitch-black darkness at the bottom of the sea where no living human eye would ever see it again, ownership of that invisible stone was bought, sold, and traded for generations across the island. Think about the profound structural brilliance of this choice. The physical presence of the coin was completely irrelevant. Only the collective agreement of its existence mattered. The Yippies had successfully decoupled wealth from physical custody. They had realized a foundational economic truth that Wall Street, central banks, and modern crypto developers wouldn't fully articulate for centuries. Money isn't a physical object. Money isn't gold, paper, or stone. Money is simply an unhackable, shared illusion. For hundreds of years, this social ledger was completely bulletproof. It withstood typhoons, generational shifts, and tribal conflicts because the underlying software, the communal consensus, never glitched. But in the late 19th century, the island's economic isolation collided with a brilliant, aggressive systemic hack. An Irish-American sea captain named David O'Keefe washed ashore after a shipwreck. He quickly realized that the island was rich in copra, dried coconut meat, highly valuable to Western traders. But the Yippies had absolutely no interest in European paper money or gold. They only valued rice stones. O'Keefe saw a massive arbitrage opportunity. He didn't sail a wooden canoe or carve limestone with shell tools. Instead, he sailed a massive iron-hulled steamship to Palau, packed it with modern steel explosives, iron crowbars and wedges, and began industrially manufacturing massive rhinestones at a fraction of the traditional cost. O'Keefe flooded the island with thousands of pristine, beautifully carved stones, demanding copra in exchange. By the laws of Western economics, the artificial injection of supply should have caused hyperinflation, crashed the currency, and collapsed the island's economy. But the Yupe's distributed ledger had a built-in firewall. The village chiefs and elders looked at O'Keefe's massive hoard of perfect stones and analyzed the production pipeline. They saw that these stones required no spiritual sacrifice, no navigation across deadly seas, and absolutely zero traditional proof of work. The labor wasn't backed by human risk. It was manufactured by a machine. In a stunning display of economic sovereignty, the elders simply refused to recognize O'Keefe's stones as valid currency. They didn't pass laws or fight a war, they just refused to update the communal memory. They ruled that stones brought via steamship lacked the essential transactional energy required to be called money. They inflation-proofed their entire civilization by simply filtering out the cheap data. Whether it is the Swiss engineering the vertical geometry of the Alps to make physical invasion an unprofitable equation, the Persians hacking Egypt's psychological code with sacred animals, or the Yuppies preserving their economy by rejecting low-effort stone data, history proves that the most powerful fortresses ever built are the ones constructed inside the mind. True sovereignty is never just about physical armor or piles of gold. It belongs to those who establish the unyielding structural rules, master their environment, and fiercely protect the integrity of their system. Hit that subscribe button, turn on notifications, and let me know in the comments. If our modern financial systems faced an unhackable community like Yap today, would Wall Street even survive? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next investigation.